Hark now the drums beat up again, for all true soldier gentlemen. Then let us list and march, I say, over the hills and far away.
We're back again to talk about the third instalment of the Sharpe series. This time it's Sharpe's Fortress, and I'm joined by Dan Davis. Dan?
Hello, bro.
You all right? How you doing?
Yeah, really good, thank you. Very good.
Good. Well, Richard Sharpe is still in India. It's as I say, the third one and the last one that's in India of the prequels, the Indian prequels. And it picks up not that long after the last one ended. So the British Army is still chasing the Maratha army through central India, up into central India. And they're on the retreat. It's sort of the Manu Bapu is the leader of the armies, isn't he?
Yeah, the Marathas are really on their last legs at this point. Like, because some of the princes have started to negotiate with the British, haven't they?
Yeah, so there was originally, I think they say there's like 5 of these big Maratha warlords, and where Wellesley and the British beat and the Sepoys beat the Scindia's army at Assaye. That's the Scindia out of the way, and now the next one is what is it? They've got all sorts of different titles, haven't they? Is it the
This
Bearer?
one's the Sultan of Berar, I believe it is. The Sultan of Berar, yeah, and he's not even present in this army, is it? He's somewhere else, in one of his palaces somewhere else, and it's his brother who's the main leader of the army, who's Manu Bapu, right?
Yeah, Manu Bapu, and he seems like he's an actual sort of warrior dude, isn't he? A warrior figure.
Yeah, he's a soldier. Yeah,
he's not scared or anything. He wants to sort of turn around and fight.
Yeah.
And so he sort of does, doesn't he? At the what's that battle called?
Oh yeah, so the book opens with the Battle of Argowum.
Argowum. Right.
Yeah, and that's Manu Bapu. Yeah, and I think maybe I don't know if I remember it wrong, if it's Cornwell in the historical note at the end, or if it's in the book, but they describe Manu Bapu as a competent soldier, that he's a good leader and he understands war and stuff. But in the 2 battles in the actual battle at the start and in the big one at the end, he doesn't really do anything, as far as I can tell. Like, he's not a very good general, it seems to me. And the Maratha army at the start of this, at Argowum, is beaten pretty easily, isn't it?
Yeah, Wellesley comes up against them, and Bernard Cornwell doesn't spend a great deal of time on it, but he does show us some of the detail. And I think one of the first lines that sort of get a volley from the Indians do retreat under it, and Wellesley has to sort of, I think, kind of personally stop them from breaking and running away. But then after that, they do their own thing, like the Highlanders get involved or something, and they march towards the guns sort of fearlessly, sort of unstoppably. And Manu Bapu throws forward some of his best Arab men, best Arab soldiers, and they just break against I think the Highlanders again. And so that battle's over, and so they have to keep retreating further and further into India and into their sort of their final stronghold, their final keep, their final, how would you describe it? Their sort of impenetrable fortress, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the great fortress, isn't it? It's never been taken. It's incredibly high and really difficult to approach. But yeah, Argowum is a really strange battle because the British are doing that thing where they're chasing the Marathas, and Wellesley's trying to catch them, and he's pushing his forces. And I think they've been doing a really fast march to try and catch up with Manu Bapu's army. And then I think they come into range at the end of the day, and it's not an ideal situation for the British to attack because the Marathas are lined up in battle formation and ready, and I think the ground is really not favourable at all. I think it's he talks about what's the crop? Oh, the millet. So there's a whole bit about what the crop is. It's enormous fields of millet, and some of the millet's really tall. Like it's taller than man height. Like I think millet can grow up to like 7, 8, 9 feet tall. So visibility is terrible. Like for both, for even for the Marathas shooting their cannons down at the British, they can't really see the lines approaching because they're just wading through fields of millet. And when the British arrive, they've been marching really hard and they're really tired out. And it would have been a logical thing to rest the troops. But if Wellesley did that, then that would give the Marathas a chance to withdraw. And what Wellesley wants more than anything is a big engagement to totally defeat this final Maratha army in the field. So he just immediately, I think the men are marching, and he doesn't even really stop them. He just makes them maneuver from a column or a couple of columns into line, and then sends them forward.
Yeah, and they can't. Again, they're kind of brittle, aren't they? That's what gets said, is that they don't seem to be able to stand, because like in European wars or the Peninsular War or something, both sides quite often were able to sort of stand there for quite a while, just firing off volleys at each other, and then just stuck in with bayonets, and they're just not up to that, are they? It seems.
Yeah, it's quite strange because Manu Bapu, they do that thing where they rely on their artillery, so they're just blasting the British, and the British just walk straight through it. The British and the Sepoys. I think there's 2, maybe 3 Highlander regiments there in the centre, I think, and then there's the Sepoy battalions on the flanks. And then Manu Bapu sends forward it when the infantry lines approach each other. Manu Bapu, the Maratha general, only sends forward his Arabs, like you said, his best troops, his crack troops, his Arab battalions, or whatever you call them, and he sends them forward alone, and he doesn't send forward any of his other infantry, and he sends his Arabs to attack the British centre, where he has the 3 Highland regiments, which is the strongest part of the British line. And while that's happening, the whole rest of his forces, all of his cavalry, all of his infantry, he just hasn't do nothing. And then when the Arabs get beaten quite handily by these excellent Highland troops, and they turn and flee, then the whole army just crumbles and retreats, and that's it. That's the end of the battle. And I think the Marathas lost thousands, certainly, and the British lost, I don't know, like 100 or something. It's completely a complete victory.
Yeah, and so they flee into the hills, and Wellesley is annoyed because, as you said, he really wanted a big victory. In fact, he wanted to just put a bow tie on this thing and go back to England, being able to say, I completely defeated our enemies, the company's enemies in India. And now, after this, and they've run away, he can't say that. He has to keep chasing them, and so he's a bit annoyed. But there's a bit that comes up in the novel, Sharpe's Fortress, which is completely fictional. But Sharpe comes across a kid on the battlefield. Do you remember this?
The little Arab kid.
Read it. Yeah.
Ahmed. Yeah.
Ahmed. Yeah. It's funny the way Cornwall describes it, because he describes it as though there's this little man. He says it's like surrounded by British soldiers on 360 degrees. This little man in the middle of a melee, flailing his sword around.
Yeah.
Sharpe's like, what's going on here? Why are people sort of crowding around this little man in the middle of half in the middle of a battle? And he sees that it's a child.
It's the allied Maratha horsemen, allied to the British, that they have this small Arab man surrounded who's fighting, who's trying to. They're toying with him, aren't they?
Yeah, like a cat with a ball of yarn, isn't it?
Yeah. I was going to say, and then Sharpe, somewhat in character, somewhat out of character, decides to get involved. I think he's pissed off at the start of this book, isn't he? Because he's been promoted from sergeant to ensign, and he's got nothing to do. So he's given a position in one of the Highland regiments. And he's really pissed off because they don't want him, the men don't want him, the officers don't want him, and even in the battle he can't do anything. He wants to fight, he wants to pick up his musket and shoot, but he feels like there's no role for him anymore. He can't do his job as a sergeant that he would have done, and he can't lead the men because he has no real no real role. So he's in a really bad mood when he sees this kid. Doesn't he fight? Because he gets involved in the fight a little bit. So he fights some of the Arabs when the Highland regiment engages the Arabs, and then he has an argument with he gets sent to get the water, and as he's sent going back to get the water, which is he considers it beneath him, then he sees this little man being tortured by the Maratha allies, right?
Mm. And then he realizes it's a boy, and these guys are just gonna sort of torture and kill this child. And for some reason, Sharpe, because quite often Sharpe's very, very cold, extremely cold. But for here, but sometimes he's not. And he decides he's going to save his life because he actually gets involved and then sort of threatens and fights off these Maratha irregular horsemen and saves this kid's life. And the kid doesn't appreciate at first, but then realizes that he has in fact saved his life, and that he becomes Sharpe's servant. Because as you say, Sharpe's an ensign at this moment. If people remember, it's because he got promoted to an officer after saving Wellesley on the field at Assaye. And he's in a Highland regiment that's commanded by an Urquhart. And Urquhart says, no one wants him. He's not really welcome there. And he says, in fact, that's one of the things in the book, one of the only other plot points I haven't mentioned yet, is that Urquhart says to him, you know what, after this is over, when we get back to England and things, when we get back to Horse Guards or whatever, we're going to transfer you to the 95th Rifles, this new regiment, which has got sort of no prestige. No one really knows exactly what it is or what it's going to be, and they've heard that it will be sort of skirmishers, and it might be sort of use new tactics and things. But it's this new thing, the 95th Rifles, and Sharpe doesn't care about it. It's not. He's just gutted that he basically doesn't really have a place in the army anymore as far as he's concerned. And until then, Urquhart puts him to the baggage wagons and things, and collecting water and stuff, which is a bit of a humiliation. It's just not a great job to be doing. And after the battle, he saves this boy Ahmed, who becomes his sort of faithful helper from that point on, doesn't it?
Yeah, his servant basically. Yeah, it is in character in a way, because Sharpe is this really angry, like you say, he's cold, and he has a real hatred for most of the upper class and the middle class as well. Just most of the world, really. But he has a real soft spot for women, and probably for orphans as well, because that's what he was. So so he kind of it is kind of in character for him to try and rescue another orphan, or a lonely kid, someone who's alone in the world. So it kind of is in character for him to do stuff like that, and he does that kind of thing throughout. I think in one of not the next book, the one after, he helps to protect an orphanage, right, in Copenhagen. Yeah, so that is in character to a certain extent. I think that he would do that, but then he ends up with an ungrateful Arab servant, because one of the other Maratha leaders, who was in a previous book, speaks to the kid in Arabic and says, this British officer just saved your life, now you owe him your life and you should serve him. And the kid gradually does come to kind of love Sharpe, doesn't he?
Yeah, it's this character, Assaye, who's like an Indian horseman that's got this vendetta against the Marathas that killed his father at Gawilghur. And he's been in the previous novels. I think we've mentioned him here or there. And and he tells that kid, and he turns up later in the story as well. So Assaye. Right. But then, so before we get to like the actual siege of the fortress at Gawilghur, there's quite a fair bit of just the novel bits of the Sharpe story and narrative. Sort of the first 2/3 really of the novel are that, and then the last third is really the action, isn't it?
Yeah, the storming of the fortress at the end it goes on for ages, and it's really, really good. It's fantastic. What did you think of the actual of the plot of the Sharpe stuff that's not historical? What did you make of all that?
Yeah, it's good. I always like it. I'm on board. This one, there was a fair bit of it, because quite often it's sort of intermingled with sort of real action and historical events. Whereas here it's just like a whole chunk of completely fictional Sharpe stuff, and then a massive chunk of real history with Sharpe involved in it.
So yeah, the big first half of the novel or more is just this fictional stuff about Sharpe and a character called Torrance, Captain Torrance. So I guess just to quickly whip through that. Sorry, go on.
No, I'd forgotten about Torrance, but yeah, he's a really funny character, isn't he? He's really like some of these early ones. I get a little bit. Sorry, some of the early novels in the actual in the historical timeline, the early ones, but the later ones that he wrote, they can get a little bit cartoonish. And there's some of that in this, where you've got not Manu Bapu, but the other guy, the other Maratha leader, who's I think he's the brother of the Maratha prince. I can't remember his name, but he's often saying he gets into his head that the British are devils, are jinns.
Oh yeah, Benny Singh, who's the leader of the garrison at Gawilghur.
Right. So he's always like panicking and freaking out and wailing that the British are jinns and they're going to fly over the walls and stuff. And all that's kind of cartoonish and a bit over the top, which you don't really get in the later novels. And that kind of irritates me a little bit. And and Hakeswill is a little bit like that as well, where he's just the comedy aspects of Hakeswill kind of turned up a little bit in this one and some of the parts of the previous two. And Torrance is a bit like that as well. Like he's a little bit over the top, but he's still, in my opinion, a really great character, a really great baddie, a really great sharp baddie, because he's evil, but he's like selfish and greedy and feckless and lazy and obnoxious. It's just horrible. It's a horrible, horrible character, but he's still kind of believable, you know? Like you kind of met people like that in your life, you know, like just complete bastards, but he's convinced himself that he's stealing and stuff for maybe not good reasons, but he has his reasons for doing it, and his view of himself is pretty believable. So looking at outside of his actions, they're completely evil, but the way Cornwell wrote him, I thought was really good, and he's funny. Like he's got so many lines that are just made me laugh out loud when I was reading it. What do you think of Torrance?
Yeah, he's really arrogant and snobbish, but in a funny way.
Yeah.
So he's a captain, and he looks down his nose, and he's sort of aristocratic and rich, it seems, although he's in debt, and that's why he's doing all these nefarious things. He's really, what's the word when you're sort of urbane or witty? He's sort of got a wit. So he's horrible and evil, but witty with it. So what happens is, where I mentioned Urquhart as given Sharpe the job of looking after stores and things and the wagons and all that sort of thing. Sharpe, being a good, diligent soldier, realizes that loads of the supplies are going missing or just not turning up. And anyway, he finds out that it's being stolen by a nasty nag who's also a pimp as well. He finds that out with the help of Ahmed. As soon as nasty nag is exposed as having stolen all these supplies, Captain Torrance turns up out of nowhere and says, "Oh, hang him then, hang the man, right now, like this minute," which they do. And Sharpe finds out, or deduces very quickly, that in fact it was all done under Torrance's auspices, and Torrance would be taking a cut. So he's basically just a corrupt, a bent officer. And Sharpe realizes it, and Hakeswill is involved in it all as well. So Hakeswill sort of at the fulcrum of all these dodgy dealings as well. And Sharpe knows it and finds out. And another sort of kind of subplot is that the brother of Nasty Nag, who's just been hung, a Jammer, the character's called Jammer, he wants revenge. He wants to kill Sharpe for what Sharpe basically did. And Hakeswill abducts Sharpe, lures him in, knocks him out, steals all the jewels, because Sharpe still got loads of those jewels from the Sultan, from the Tipu Sultan, Seringapatam, still sewn into his clothes, which Hakeswill suspected. He knocks him out. Ahmed gets away in this ambush, luckily, but Hakeswill gets all Sharpe's jewels and hands him over to Jammer, who's going to have Sharpe murdered.
Yeah, the whole bit I think is good. The whole the whole plot about the stolen horseshoes and the horse nails and muskets and stuff that are getting stolen. I suspect that Cornwell had the idea of that for a subplot from the fact that historically, when the British conquered Gawilghur, they went into the storeroom and they found British supplies in there. So this was I think they found like 200 muskets, 200 British muskets in the fort. So clearly there were actual thefts and stuff, and there was actual corruption in the British supply line historically. So Cornwall's actually worked in what was a real genuine problem for the British in India, which I thought was a great thing that he's done there, worked in the history in a subtle way. But I thought the plot was good. I thought the fact that he had that, I can't remember the woman's name, Claire. Oh yeah, because her name's Claire Wall, and Captain Torrance calls her Brick as a way to insult her, to sort of run her down really horribly, just bullies and just a complete bastard to his servant. It's called Claire Wall. Let's call it Brick. I thought that whole subplot was good. It really engaged me more than the previous two novels. I was pretty enthralled throughout, and he gets kidnapped by Hakeswill. He gets rolled in the carpet, doesn't he? He gets rolled up in the carpet and transported away from the British to some remote temple, where he's going to be executed by two of those jetties, which were in the first book. Those two, they're gigantic Indian strongmen, and so he has to fight them. And that bit, again, slightly cartoonish, but also brilliant, I thought. What do you think of of Sharpe's fight against the two massive, oiled up Indian strongmen?
Yeah, it's good. It's very much like a scene in a movie or a TV show, isn't it? Rather than a realistic, depiction of a real event. It just reads very much like a scene. But yeah, it's great. I really like it. And Sharpe, it's just like it's curtains for Sharpe. He's definitely dead. There's no way out. It's like a James Bond scene. Yeah. Just everything, all the details are just piled on top of each other to reinforce that there's no way out.
Yeah.
And these two jetties, and he's completely surrounded by a whole massive group, a whole, as you say, sort of a temple full of people there to see a gruesome execution of an Englishman.
He says he's gonna rip his balls off with his bare hands, and then he's gonna take him apart piece by piece. Like he's gonna rip off his fingers one by one, and his toes, and his ears, and his nose, and his tongue, and his lips, and stuff, with his bare hands as a sacrifice to the gods. Just the most horrific death you can imagine.
Yeah, and Sharpe sort of really he sort of brasses it out, doesn't he? Just sticks his chest out. He's unapologetic. He never doesn't lose his nerve. And when the moment comes, he the Deus Ex Machina is that Assaye savagery sort of turns up and gives him sort of a fighting chance. Sort of literally turns up at the back of the crowd, saying somehow it ends up so that Sharpe's got a spear and the jetty's got a sword, or the other way round, and they have a little bit of of course Sharpe's the better soldier.
Yes, because Ahmed got away, right? So Hakeswill didn't manage to catch Ahmed. Ahmed escaped, jumped on a horse, and rode for Syed Savaji, and that's how. Oh yeah, and then Ahmed's in the crowd, and he's shouting like "Sharpe, Sharpe," and Ahmed gives him a sword. Yeah, and then they fight with he swaps his sword for a spear, and then the jetty gets the sword, and they fight spear against sword, don't they?
Yeah, and it's funny because Sharpe is obviously better at fighting. It says like the jetty is not used to fighting with weapons. He's used to twisting people's heads off with his bare hands. He doesn't really know how to use a sword properly or anything. And Sharpe knows that in a one-on-one, a spear is better than a sword anyway. So he totally knows he's got this guy's number. And even though he's just about to be murdered in the most horrific way possible, Sharpe sort of is immediately sort of gloating, isn't he? And like playing with him, isn't he? Like, and he does just kill him, doesn't he? He just murders him, like rips his belly open or something, and then stabs his throat out or something. And while he's doing it, he's like goading him as well. Like Sharpe is pretty brutal a lot of the time, most of the time, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh yeah, and he commits another murder in this, right? So he ultimately escapes from that, and then gets his revenge on the people that did it to him. So that's the next bit in the story. So he then goes back to Captain Torrance, and like Torrance has so Sharpe murders Captain Torrance's Indian servant, and Sharpe murders Captain Torrance and makes it look like Torrance killed his servant and then killed himself. So yeah, Sharpe's just committed two proper murders. And then later, during a scouting mission up near the fort, Sharpe goes and tries to kill Hakeswill and two other privates that are basically Hakeswill's right-hand men that helped to capture Sharpe. And he goes and cuts their throats too, and doesn't manage to get Hakeswill. But so in this one, Sharpe commits 4 murders. He's our hero, and he commits 4. They're justified, but he commits 4 murders as a British officer, which is pretty funny.
Yeah, because in fact, the killing of Torrance, again, he goads him. Like he says, it's like quite rude and cruel to him. Like, I'm gonna cut your throat or something. He just tells him, I'm gonna shoot you in the face or something, and then just does. And it's one of the first ones actually in the series of books. It's the first one where you're like, that is proper cold, like quite dark cold. Because even the killing of the jetty a minute ago, it was sort of, as you say, almost cinematic, almost sort of funny, almost comical levels of violence, and the jetty obviously deserved it anyway, sort of thing. But not that Torrance doesn't deserve it, but this is just like a real sort of a murderer's murder. This one, it seems. Because when I read it for the first time, and when he does just shoot him at point blank range, looking him in the face, pointing a pistol in his face, and does just pull the trigger, I did think, oh, that's sort of indefensible a bit. Like that was if you're playing by the rules of life, of 18th century life, you shouldn't just murder officers, even if they are corrupt and things. So yeah, he's definitely got a sort of a fully dark side, isn't he?
Yeah, but this is Sharpe's personal morality. So he's only murders people that have tried to murder him. I think maybe not. Maybe he murders some other people as well in the whole series. But generally speaking, he's generally taking revenge, isn't he, against other murderers and other evil people. So he doesn't kill. He protects women and children, and there's little hints where he can't stand to see horses and animals suffering. So I think in this, or one of the books, there's one of the next couple of books, there's horses that have been hit by explosives or something that they're suffering, and he gets really angry and upset because he can't take seeing animals hurt. And he risks his life to protect women and children. So he's a good man, right? And he's revenging wrongs, and he's killing evil people. But he's doing it in a way that is completely illegal and brutal and cold. But I think that's what people like about him. The fact that he's got his own morality, and he will kind of circumvent the law, and the fact that the law in those days, well, and now, protects the wealthy and the privileged and the upper classes. And he knows that if he tries to go through proper channels, then there will be no real justice. So he just takes it into his own hands. So it's consistent. But it is brutal. But I think a lot of people like that, Maybe wouldn't want to see it in real life, but it's good to read about characters that have absolute morality like that, I think.
It's definitely good. It's like James Bond does quite brutal, dark things, but he's the hero, of course. Yeah, and Torrance was bad. He had sold Sharpe out to be killed. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So Sharpe totally had grounds in his mind to just kill him. But the way this one was, as I say, sort of looking him in the face at point blank range, it was one of those. There's sort of no mitigating elements to it. And then Sharpe sort of saves Brick, doesn't he?
So yeah, gets her out of there. Yeah, no, he was complete, but he was an evil man. But I think there's a lot of this in Cornwell's books where he has this profound sense of right or wrong, and if someone has done wrong, then morally you can kill them. Like a lot of his heroes behave in the same sort of way. I think that probably comes from Cornwell's view of right and wrong. He's really enjoying, like viscerally enjoying the justice being done. Seeing the guilty man shitting himself and really coming to terms with the fact that Sharpe is here to deliver justice, that kind of thing.
Yeah, he's like the angel of death in many ways to a lot of people. He turns up and it's like, yeah, I'm the dude. I'm the guy who comes knocking. I'm the one that's going to get you. Yeah, he like sort of delivers.
Yeah, Hakeswill's terrified. Hakeswill's terrified of him, isn't he? When he's scared when Sharpe's coming to murder him in the dark later on, and then when he sees him at the end of the novel, he's just terrified of him because he's somewhat inhuman.
Yeah, well, that's the next bit of the story. After he does away with Torrance and rescues Brick, who he gives some of the money to, I think, some of the jewels to try and keep safe. He then goes after Hakeswill and his band of, I think, 5 guys. Hakeswill's band of 5 sort of jabronis, privates that work for Hakeswill. He goes after all of them. He puts out word, or he pretends that he was in fact killed in that temple by the jetties, and that Sharpe is dead, and so he's now completely undercover, flying dark, and literally in the dark as well, ambushing Hakeswill's men, trying to pick them off one by one. And as you say, he gets a couple of them, he murders a couple of them, and Hakeswill sort of twigs what's going on and realizes, he's next, and so again a little bit of a stretch for the plot line, but Hakeswill at this point deserts and goes over to the Indian side, goes over to William Dodd. We haven't mentioned William Dodd yet, have we? But he's there. He's at Gawilghur inside the fortress, and Hakeswill deserts over to their side.
Yeah, in the middle of the night. So by this point, I think the fortress is something like 2,000 feet up, and there's a steep, very, very long road that leads up to it, or a couple of roads. And I think at some point Dodd says it takes him something like 8 hours to march his battalion from the plain to the fortress. That's how much of a climb it is. It's like all day it's actually to climb up there. And then the British have to attack that. They have to somehow get guns, very, very heavy guns, like guns that weigh many tons, up those kind of slopes and within range of the guns on the fortress. And then to start their attack, to break down the walls of the fortress and then to send their men in, it's an enormous problem because the fortress itself is ancient. I think they say, it's hundreds of years old anyway. It's like a late medieval fortress. So the walls aren't going to stand up to modern artillery. But that's not really the problem. The problem is the fact that it's in such a ridiculous position that even approaching it is difficult. So that's the problem that the British Army and Wellesley have to deal with before they can take the fortress and effectively win the war at that point, or at least force the Marathas into terms. So yeah, so it's really a problem of engineering, isn't it? To get the guns up to that point. So they have to do things like widen and flatten and improve the roads. And I think they do it in a couple of weeks, where they send the engineers up and they're basically improving the path so that they can use their bullocks and even elephants to drag up these heavy guns to batter down the walls.
Yeah. So the Fortress of Gargoyle, the famous. What's the line that gets said again? Is it something like whoever controls the Fortress of Gawilghur controls India?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah,
something like that. And it's supposed to have been never been taken before, because it seems like a completely impenetrable position. So the way it's described is that there's the open plain, the sort of vast, endless Deccan plain, and then rising out of that is this giant wall of cliff face, right? And then jutting out from this sort of wall of rock, giant, like what is it? They say it's like a couple of thousand feet, ridiculously steep.
Yeah, I think it's 2,000 feet up.
And sticking out from that is sort of like a promontory area sort of thing, with like a small causeway leading out to it. And on that promontory of rock is the Fortress of Gawilghur, with like a double perimeter wall with an inner and outer fort, and just this one little like causeway leading to it, really really narrow. Otherwise, it's sheer drops, massive sheer drops on all sides, and you have to attack it. These two gatehouses, what do they call the gatehouses? Anyway, the upshot is it seems a ridiculously hard place to besiege, and yet Arthur Wellesley decides he has to.
Yeah, they have to take it. They have to. They can't. They don't have time to wait them out. They've probably got enormous numbers of supplies in there and water, and the British would run out of food before the garrison up there. So they have to take it. And they don't really know what the defences are, do they? Like, I think historically they didn't really realise that until the attack was underway, that there was an outer fort, which was its own contained thing with about 1,000 men inside, maybe more. And then between that and the next fort, there was a huge ravine, a very, very steep ravine that's narrow, where the British would have to crowd into it and then cross the ravine under the guns and the muskets of the guys in the inner fort, and then they have to somehow get through the gate. But then there's four gates leading into the fort, and the gates are not aligned. So if you get through one gate, you then have to turn sharply to the left, and then the gate's down there, and then there's 4 more like that. So you can't just shoot through. And the British didn't know that until the attack was underway. So it's a very well designed fort. So even with the outer fort wall blasted down, actually taking the inner fort would have been extremely, extremely bloody. They wouldn't have been able to use their cannons to blast through, and they wouldn't have been able to chop through either. So
yeah, so the engineers, Wellesley looks up at it. There's a bit, you see, it's a great little scene, isn't it, when Wellesley sort of first looks up at this hilltop mountain fort, and he thinks, well, it sort of looks impossible, but we've kind of got to do it. We've got to give it a crack. So let's send some engineers up there, see what we can do, see what we need to do. Yeah, and they spend ages building roads up to it. So and cannon parks, like sort of what do they call it? It's like a car park for cannons.
Yeah.
So they can get loads of batteries up there and start pounding the walls down. And they've got lots of water inside. There's like massive water tanks, it says they've got, and they know they're going to be besieged. So Wellesley is against the clock, not them. But the British engineers and gunners are good. And once we sort of get up there after a couple of weeks, we do start sort of pounding down the walls and make breaches in the walls. And they have to, send forlorn hopes into the breaches. I just got 2 quotes I sort of highlighted in the book. Can I read the first one here? Just a quick paragraph. It says, it's Sharpe. He could see the fight clearly enough, for the breach was high above the approach road, and the Scots, scrambling up using their hands, were clearly visible. The British gunners were still firing, hammering round shot just inches over the Scotsmen's heads to keep the summit of the breach clear of the enemy. And then, abruptly, the guns stopped, and the redcoats climbed into the dust that hung thick above the shattered stones. A mass of Arabs climbed into the breach's inner slope, coming to oppose the Scots, and scimitars rang against bayonets. That's quite good. That's a classic bit of Cornwall there. It's it's a page turner, as always. Goes without saying.
Yeah, the final attack part is brilliant. Yeah, it feels like golden era Cornwall. It feels like the later or the middle books or the next bit in the peninsula. It feels like that, where Sharpe is, where he shouldn't really be involved, and he kind of forces himself. He forcibly takes command of the light company of the 33rd, his old regiment, and it's Sharpe's initiative that wins the day, and despite all of the idiotic officers trying to get in his way. And so this is another kind of slightly cartoonish bit in the story, actually, where he comes across his old company, the light company, and his old is it Morris?
Morris,
Captain Morris, who worked with Hakeswill to get him whipped in the first book, and in this the light company are involved in the attack, and Sharpe turns up where he shouldn't be there, and he's not in the 33rd anymore. He's in the Highlanders, And the 33rd of the regiment that Sharpe belonged to at the start of this series were not actually here historically. Cornwell puts them here so Sharpe can do what he does. In reality, there was the Sepoy battalions, and I think that only the Highlanders were the only British troops involved in the attack. But yeah, Sharpe tries to force Captain Morris and the Light Company to join in the attack, and Captain Morris says no, and he's a coward and he's an alcoholic and he's trying to hide. And then Sharpe just beats him up, doesn't he? He beats him to a pulp. He beats him unconscious, and then he says, Captain Morris has taken on well. And it's like people see him do it, don't they? Like the privates and stuff, like just witness it. And then he takes command of the Light Company and leads them in, and he eventually sees a way in. But again, this is quite unrealistic. I don't think so he thinks at that point, I have to win glory now, otherwise I will be up on charges. I will lose my commission and all the rest of it because people saw me beat up Morris. But if I manage to be a hero in this attack and I lead the Light Company and win the day, then I'll be a hero and I won't be in trouble. And I just don't think that would be very likely historically to have an ensign or like a junior officer beating up a captain, beating him unconscious. Even if he then went on to do something heroic, there would be no consequences. It's as if that would just get dropped. But yeah, that's a bit ridiculous, I think. But it's quite funny and satisfying that Sharpe kind of ultimately gets his revenge on Morris at the end of this trilogy. That's part of it, isn't it?
It's funny, that bit, because it's really violent. He leaves him for dead. You find out later that he only knocked him out. And but I reread that bit just the other day, and so he punches him in the gut, punches him in the face, kicks him in the chest while he's on the ground, and then punches him in the face a couple more times, and then stomps him. It says it stomps him in the face, and his head cracks against the rock, and he's unconscious. And then it says, and then he kicked him in the head again, in his unconscious head as he walked away. And Cornwall, for the moment, leaves it there. You don't know if he's dead. So yeah, it's funny. And he says the first punch. He says that's for getting me flogged, you bastard, or something. And Sharpe just takes control of the Light Company at that point. He says, "Oh yeah, he's been taken ill," even though everyone just saw what happened. But there's this inner fort and outer fort, and between them is this ravine, deep ravine, like you said. And they blasted a hole in the outer wall, sort of classic breach style, and they eventually got full-on hopes in there, or took the breaches, so you get as many men in there as you want or you need. But then there's this deep ravine, and then another wall and another fort gatehouse, which is sort of ridiculously hard. As you mentioned, there's a number of doors that you have to smash through, and then there's a bend in the stone corridor, so you can't just blast all of them through with a cannon. You would have to fight through all of them, one after another, which is sort of maybe impossible. But they try. It's this a Kenny. Is it Captain or Major Kenny?
Colonel. Is it Colonel? He's
Colonel,
really high rank. Yeah, it's Colonel Kenny.
Apologies.
Yeah.
And he's real, isn't he? He's a real guy.
Yeah, he's a real guy. Yeah, so he was the colonel of one of the Highland regiments. Yeah, I think so. Anyway, yeah.
Right, and so the passage through the gatehouse on the second fort. It says it's just 25 paces long and 8 wide, and it turns at 90 degrees. So that's a ridiculously small space that you're supposed to fight through. Oh, and you could be rained down from above. They can shoot down and throw things down from above on you the whole time.
It's just like a slaughterhouse. It's horrific. The fact that these guys actually got in there and started that attack. And Kenny, Colonel Kenny, actually led the attack, and he was killed at the gate. Yeah,
it's the same guys as well that had just breached the outer wall. It's like the same guys. Kenny was one of the first through the breach on the outer wall, and then leads at least the first attack into the second gate. Well, I've got the second quote I wanted to read out, actually. I may as well just say it now. So it says, Kenny's surviving men tried to brave the fire. They tried to climb the slope to the second gate, but the murderous fire did not cease, and the dead made a barrier to the living. Some attempted to fire up at their tormentors on the fire step, but the sun was high now, and they aimed into a blinding glare, and soon the redcoats began to back down the passage. The weltering fire from above did not let up. It flayed the Scotsmen, ricocheting between the walls, struck dead and dying and living, while the rockets, lit and tossed down, seared like great comets between the stone walls and filled the space with a sickening smoke. The dead were burned by rocket flames, which exploded their cartridge boxes to pulse gouts of blood against the black walls. But the smoke hid the survivors, who, under its cover, stumbled back to the hill outside the fortress. They left a stone-walled passage filled with dying and dead, trickling with blood, foul with smoke, and echoing with the moans of the wounded. End quote.
Yeah, horrific.
And well, that really happened, and we lost nearly all of our casualties for the whole day were there. I think we only lost 100, 150, 200 odd guys all in all, and they were nearly all there really in the first breach, and Kenny himself is killed in that action. And so it seems like the British Army has sort of stalled the inner fort of Gawilghur, the impenetrable inner fort of Gawilghur does seem to be holding. Doesn't seem to be a way in until Ensign Richard Sharpe has a bright idea.
Yeah, so Sharpe, this reflects, this is what Cornwall does a few times, where he takes a real historical person's achievements and removes them from the story and gives it to Sharpe. So the real guy who worked this out was also the captain of the light company of one of the Highland regiments. His name was Captain Campbell, Captain Archibald Campbell, and he was the guy who, whilst all this attack was going on and failing, he was at the outer fort basically and looking across the ravine through his telescope, trying to work out if there was another way. And actually, so imagine there's an outer fortress, and then there's this steep drop, like a cliff basically that it's sitting on, into a ravine, and then another cliff which is almost vertical, and then on top of that is the wall and the gate of the inner fortress. So even to get to, you can't really reach there's a road up to the gate which you can attack up, but the rest of it you can't really reach the wall because it's atop a cliff. But this Captain Campbell of the Light Company is looking along on the left-hand side from the gate, and he thinks he can see a way up the slope. So he decides on his own initiative to lead the Light Company up there to the very top of the cliff and the base of the wall. There's like a very narrow ledge. So he gets a ladder, or at least one ladder, and says if we can get a ladder up to there, then we can climb over the top of the wall in an escalade. And amazingly, that's what he does. And that's what Sharpe does in the story.
Yeah, it's great, isn't it? Just to mention, it's not the same Campbell that was first over the wall at Ahmednuggur. It's a different Campbell. But yeah, like it's so brave, isn't it? And
apparently, sorry. Yeah, I just have a little detail that I happen to know, because they're all Scottish, obviously, which is one reason why Sharpe feels so out of place, because he's English, and everyone else in the Highland Regiment is Scottish. And apparently, in the 94th Highlanders, there were 6 officers called Campbell. And yeah, sorry, carry on.
And 4 of them's first name was Donald. To try and escalade on this tiny little ledge. It's not even a ledge. It doesn't appear to be a proper ledge, but this Campbell sort of calculates that maybe you could prop a ladder up there. And because it's such a ridiculous place to attack the wall, it's not really being defended hardly at all. It doesn't seem as though there's any Indian soldiers defending that part of the wall. As soon as you get a guy over those ramparts, they'll know what's going on, and the jig will be up, and the element of surprise will be lost. But at least to begin with, you could sort of sneak a ladder up there, get a few guys up, and start trying to get over the wall. And so that's what they do.
Because there's I think there's about something like 2,000 men, 2,000 British attacking the fortress, and there's about 8,000 inside. So in the ravine, so in the outer fort and the ravine, there's about 2,000 British soldiers, and they're firing on the wall, and there's a lot of them trying to find cover down in the ravine trying to get fire on the wall, and there's small like 9-pounder cannons being brought up to the maybe some captured cannons as well that are being aimed from the outer fort at the inner fort. So while all this is going on, there's just the garrison inside the inner fort along the walls and with the guns on the cannons on the walls are also firing down at the British. So it's filled with smoke and noise and redcoats everywhere. So it wasn't just empty and the light company rushed across and climbed up and no one noticed. It was like a full battle raging, and through that confusion, this attack was led on the wall. So it's more understandable, but it's even braver, really, because they ran through this fire and just sort of clambered up a cliff. I don't even know how high it was, but it's very high and dangerous.
Yeah, and it's great because I think Cornwall says at the end in his historical note that Wellesley got a reputation for, well, he took Gawilghur with 2 ladders, and he took the impregnable Gawilghur with 1.
Oh, was it one ladder? Right, yeah.
Yeah, they had 1 ladder, I believe, yeah. And once they start spilling men over that inner rampart and sort of are able to just keep piling men over there, they can try and attack the gatehouse, the fort itself, from the inside. And so that's what they do. They still sort of start getting inside. There's one thing I just wanted to mention, because you get a fair few pages of it, or a bit of detail of what's happening inside the fort just before the English get in. That Dodd locks the door to Manu Bappo was and his men were defending the outer wall and the outer fortress, the outer gatehouse. And when that falls, they expect to be let in to the inner fort, but Dodd locks the door against them, and in fact murders Manu Bappo as well. And there's a little bit of real history there as well, that apparently whoever it was in real life was defending the gate of the inner fort, did lock it and lock loads of their own men out to just be slaughtered by the redcoats in the ravine.
Really?
Yeah. But Dodd is a fictional character. There's quite a lot of him in this book, which isn't all that important, but he's quite a big character in it. And he fancies himself as taking over, being a sovereign in India and taking over, just winning this whole thing. And he does also order Hakeswill to murder the other guy we mentioned, the Benny Singh, the commander of the garrison, who's just a sort of a craven coward type dude, who's got a lapdog and 18 women that he poisons. Remember that bit? He poisons all his own women folk.
His harem and his wife and his kids and stuff. Yeah, that actually happened. That he actually did that. Yeah, terrible.
Yeah, Goebbels style.
Yeah, horrific.
Magda Goebbels style. All 18 of them, and then Hakeswill just murders him and takes some of his jewels. There's a few jewels. Gawilghur is actually quite impoverished. There's not really much or hardly any plunder there. But on these dead women, there are a few rubies and pearls and things, and Hakeswill takes those. Yeah.
But yeah, the real Benny Singh and the real Manu Bappo, although they didn't do anything really to protect their fortress, they did, and Benny Singh poisoned his wife and kids and his harem. They did actually fight, and I think they were both killed in the fighting. You know, they were both died with swords in their hands. So don't want to besmirch their names too much, but yeah, they didn't do a very good job. But they at least died heroically. They didn't poison themselves or escape. They did actually fight to the death.
Yeah, Manu Bappo definitely did. I think he died dying in the breaches of the outer wall. Yeah. And so the English army is sort of getting inside. That is one other thing I wanted to say, is that the Indians, the Marathas, didn't really defend it well at all, really, did they?
No, they didn't.
So, for example, they could have bombarded the British as they're building this road that's and harassed them that whole time. Would have set them back weeks or months, but they just didn't. And then they could also, there's a number of sort of baffles and things they could have done. Like they could have built an earthwork in front of their wall, which would have just set us back, where we have to bombard their wall down. We'd have to bombard through this earthwork as well, which was sort of kind of common practice, at least in Europe. And they didn't bother doing any of that. And there's a few other things they could have done to sort of make it a lot harder for us, which they didn't, which is worth mentioning.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, they could have sent out raids, because they had the men. They had something like 8,000 men in there. So they had the ordinary garrison, which would have been, I don't know, less than that, and then they had a lot of the men who'd fought at Argowum under Manu Bapu. So they had loads of men that they could have used to send out to, just to stop the roads being built, and to harass the British. If they could have slowed the British down enough, then they could have come to terms, possibly. If they'd slowed them down for long enough, then the British would have had to leave. But I think they must have just, well, if it wasn't cowardice, they must have just expected the fortress to just defeat them. But the British, really, it was a victory by the British engineers, I would say, the British logistics and the British engineers, building a road in something like 10 days from the plain up 2,000 feet elevation and blasting down the wall in a couple of days.
Yeah, definitely sort of an engineering feat from our point of view. Because apparently after this is all over, it was never used again as a fort. The ruins are pretty much left. They're still there now, left as they were.
Yeah.
It was just kind of completely abandoned because, as you said, their thinking was, well, they just can't get in. They cannot get in. No army ever has, no army ever could. It's not possible. So why even sort of waste men harrying them? We'd rather just have every man we've got on the walls for when they attempt their inevitably doomed attempts. That was their thinking, I think. That's what Cornwall tells us, isn't it?
Yeah, presumably, because it seems like, just like at Argowum, where Manu Bapu didn't really do anything as a general, he just didn't do anything. He didn't give any orders, and it seems like he did the same sort of thing at Gawilghur. He just had some men on the wall, and then that was it. He had the numbers to do more. Maybe their morale was really bad, and he didn't trust to send them out or something like that. But who knows the actual practicalities of command? But yeah, they could have done more for sure. They had a pretty good position, and they could have potentially stalled the British enough to get some sort of favourable terms. But instead, they got walked over in the end, and that was kind of the end of it, wasn't it? I mean, that was the end of it as far as Wellesley was concerned. And Cornwall has Wellesley thinking stuff like this in the book, as I recall, thinking stuff like, I can't spend any more time in India because I need to further my career back in Britain, because my enemies are going to take advantage of my absence, and I want to go home as a victorious general and further my career, his political career in Britain. So as far as he's concerned, kind of job done. I'll leave the rest of it to other people, and I'm going to go home now. And Sharpe is going home as well, isn't he?
Yeah, Wellesley thinks, well, he's correct in thinking that it's over. That threat, that particular Maratha army and threat is now dealt with. And Europe is where it's at. It's 1803. Napoleon has won many victories. He's the first consul of France already. And it's obvious that Europe is the place to win real and great victories. He doesn't want to be in India, which is sort of a backwater, it seems, increasingly. There was one point there, just very briefly, about that they thought that it could not be taken. Again, that's why they didn't really do much. That their thinking was that the combination of that inner fort, the inner gatehouse, and the ravine, it was just so absolutely 100% impossible to get past that. That was all they needed. That was sort of the end of the story. There was no more calculations to be made,
Yeah. And they were almost right. That's the thing. They were almost right. Like the actual kind of frontal attack on the inner fort was beaten back. And if Campbell hadn't found that route up and the climb over the wall, or if someone hadn't found that, then they would have had to. It would have taken, well, probably weeks. They would have had to bring the cannon up to the inner wall of the outer fort, and then blast down the walls to create breaches on the outer wall of the inner fort, and then attack it that way. Which, well, it would have been days anyway.
And so it is remarkable that Wellesley did it in one day, and with the loss of, what is it, less than 200 guys, I think. And there's one one quote I saw somewhere, or maybe it was in Bernard Cornwell's historical note again, I can't remember, but somebody had said, a military historian, had said that Gawilghur was in fact, bona fide a ridiculously good position to defend, and that I think he said something like even 3 troops of Boy Scouts could have defended it for a whole summer. Something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, again, that escalade, that Campbell with that ladder over the bit of wall that was very, very lightly defended is sort of a masterstroke. And yeah, and it gives Wellesley, because he wasn't there, he was on the whole other side of the whole position. He wasn't anywhere near the breaching walls and all the action that day.
Yeah,
he wasn't actually looking at it, and yet this Campbell sort of wins him now a reputation for being a master. He's a master of sieges. He can do magical, wondrous things.
Yeah, but I mean, he set everything up pretty well, even without knowing the details of the inner fort's defenses and stuff. They had other positions on the other side where they'd again built another route up where they could get close enough to lob mortars at the extreme range against the other wall to draw off a few defenders, a diversion basically. So yeah, there were more positions around the fort, not attacked with infantry, but attacked with artillery, not to form breaches, but just to draw some of the attention from the infantry attack. But yeah, Wellesley wasn't. I think the attack must have been under Stevenson, ultimately. Yeah, so Wellesley, wasn't dictating the attack personally. He was just waiting to hear how it went, basically. So then. There is a peace treaty after this, isn't there? So the Marathas do sign a peace treaty, and it basically the whole kind of Deccan area does come under British control, where they agree to pay revenues or whatever the terms of the peace treaty are, and and the British kind of dust their hands, and Wellesley goes home, kind of a hero. I think he hints in the story that the general public in Britain don't really consider military victories in India that big a deal. It's like he's made a name for himself as a competent man, but as far as the British are concerned, it's like it's far away and no one really takes it very seriously, and it's not like a naval victory or something like that. It's just he's not even a household name, really, is he? When he goes home, Wellesley, he's just
They say that his name is well known and famous and well regarded at horse guards,
right?
i.e. the army headquarters. But amongst the general public, no one would have heard of him, more or less. But so Arthur Wellesley gets to go home, at least covered in glory in some quarters, if nothing else. He's made a name for himself in the army that he's, if nothing, at least competent.
Yeah.
And so one last thing just to mention, I suppose, is the little bit of revenge and comeuppance that Sharpe gives to Hakeswill right at the end. Do you remember that?
Yeah, again, he just tries to get animals to kill him. Is a tiger, an elephant, and now snakes, I think.
Yeah, snakes.
He throws him in a snake pit. Yeah. Ridiculous. Cartoonish, but funny. Yeah.
So in the confusion when Gawilghur is being ransacked, because when the British soldiers do get in, sort of your reward for being asked to run into death, into a breach, your reward is that you can go mental once you get inside, raping and pillaging and everything, which did happen. Apparently, there was a bit of a massacre there. Most of the people inside were killed. But anyway, in that confusion, Hakeswill takes off his jacket where he'd been serving under Dodd and the Cobras, the white-coated Cobras, takes that off and tries to pick up a red coat jacket and slip back into English lines. But Sharpe sort of spots him and gets all his jewels back, his own jewels, the Tipu's jewels, which Hakeswill had, and the few jewels Hakeswill had just plundered off the dead women. Of Benny Singh's dead women. So Sharpe gets all his jewels back and a bit more, and then humiliates Hakeswill, making him strip off naked, and then throws him down this snake pit, which had been mentioned earlier in the story, which is some sort of cruel and unusual execution method that Benny Singh had used. So there's all cobras at the bottom of this really steep, deep pit, and he throws him in there and leaves him there. So it's funny. It's that as you say, in Tiger, he leaves him to be devoured by a tiger, and in Triumph, an elephant's going to crush him, and he relieves him to be killed by snakes. But Hakeswill don't kill easy.
No,
he can't be killed.
He cannot die.
He cannot die. That's right. One last thing also to mention, Dodd. We haven't really mentioned him much. Finally, again, Sharpe has a 1-on-1, finds him inside Gawilghur on the walls, has a 1-on-1, but Dodd is a superior swordsman and actually cuts Sharpe in the face.
Yeah, so that's how. So Sharpe is described as in the first novel that Cornwell wrote, which was Sharpe's Eagle, and from then on, he's described as having a facial scar that gives his face at rest a kind of sneering expression that kind of disturbs people, makes him look even more savage than he really is. And this is where he gets it. He gets it from Dodd in a duel that Sharpe cannot win.
Yeah, and because it's sort of a denouement, sort of obviously, like a crescendo of something. He finally has this 1-on-1 with Dodd, and you expect Sharpe's just going to boot him in the balls or do something mean, throw an elbow and kill him easily. But he's not. Dodd's actually a great swordsman. Sharpe really isn't. I mean, he's lucky to be an officer at all, to even be wearing a sword, and he's never been schooled in fencing or anything. So Dodd sort of starts playing with him, and in the end, it takes Ahmed gets involved and does some cheap shot, and someone else, some cavalry officer, shoots Dodd in the shoulder. And anyway, it just gives Sharpe just enough time to deliver a coup de grace. And so, of course, our hero Richard Sharpe wins, but he's actually outclassed by Dodd.
Yeah, and Dodd kills Ahmed because Ahmed.
Ahmed gets it.
He puts on his a red coat and follows Sharpe into the attack, despite being told not to, and then Dodd kills Ahmed. So Ahmed Sharpe doesn't know he's there, and then Dodd kills him, and then Dodd's about to kill Sharpe, and I think and then Sharpe's friend, who's a cavalry sergeant, shoots Dodd, and then that's the end. So a little bit of a bittersweet ending, but for Sharpe, he's proven himself. So that's what he wanted to achieve in the story, is the fact that he's thinking about leaving the army. They say you can sell your commission and get some money, and he sort of imagines running an inn somewhere, and he's thinking, should I be in the army? The army doesn't seem to want me. So that's the big kind of crisis, the big personal crisis at the heart of the novel. And Sharpe leads this assault on the fortress to try and prove to himself that he can lead men in battle and that he's good at it, and also to get a name for himself that he can then take to the rifles, because he does accept a commission in the rifles, so he can leave the 74th or whatever it was Highlanders and go and be a rifleman, and he can go there, he thinks, with riches and with a name. So he achieves what he intended to achieve at the start. So it is a very good ending to his time in India. I think it's good. You see him grow enormously in those 3 novels, and so in my opinion, this third one is by far the best out of the 3. I think the first one's quite shaky, the second one's pretty good, and this one, especially the end, is brilliant. It feels more like classic Sharpe to me. This one, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think you're right. Certainly the last bit, the whole siege itself is, it's just really good. Just a page turner, just 100%. And so Sharpe, you're quite right. You see him grow massively. At the beginning, he's a private, and now he's like a famous ensign that's saved Arthur Wellesley and been over the wall first somewhere. So it's good. Yeah, he's heading back to England. Yeah, he's not sure whether when he gets back to London he might sell his commission and just do something else entirely, or maybe give the 95th a go, see what it's like.
I think at the end he is saying, I'm going to be a lieutenant in the 95th. I think that's how it's left. That he's decided to become a lieutenant in the 95th.
It's funny because in Prey, which is 2 books later, the next one is Sharpe's Trafalgar. He's on his way home in a boat, and then the one after that is once he gets back to London, is Sharpe's Prey, and there he does consider or looks into whether he can sell it or not. But there's events in between those 2 things which change Sharpe's thinking and outlook on life. But it was definitely a great novel. You could start, you could read Fortress as your first Sharpe novel for sure, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's good, really, because there's many points you can start at. Like the first time I read the series, these three weren't out yet. Right. So I started with Rifles or Eagle or something like that. Not that I read them all in order. I read them the order that I found them in the charity shop or whatever, or that my mum found them in the charity shop. But yeah, so you can start later for sure. And actually, the next two that are coming up are quite unusual in the series, aren't they? So there's Sharpe's Trafalgar, which is the next one, which is a lot of people's favourite, which is weird because it's not anything like a normal Sharpe book. And then Sharpe's Prey, which I think is one of the weakest ones. And again, it's quite unusual. He becomes like a spy in that one. And then after that, he's in Iberia, isn't he? He's in Portugal, and then he's in Spain and all the rest of it. So that's when you really get stuck into it. But yeah, it's a good ending to the opening trilogy, I think.
Yeah, you're quite right. And the next one, Sharpe's Trafalgar, I think it's the most odd one out, because I've reread it already for this series. So just finished it not too long ago, and it's totally the odd one out. I think it's still really good, but it's sort of almost entirely on board ship, which is you don't get that at any other time in any of the Sharpe books, right? But yeah, so we'll get onto that next time, Sharpe's Trafalgar.
Sounds good. Looking forward to it.
Cheers.
Hark now, the drums beat up again, for all true soldier gentlemen. Then let us list and march, I say, over the hills and far away, over the hills and o'er the main, to Flanders, Portugal and Spain. Queen Anne commands and we'll obey, over the hills and far away. All gentlemen that have a mind to serve the Queen that's good and kind, come list and enter into play, then o'er the hills and far away, over the hills and o'er the main, to Flanders, Portugal and Spain. Queen Anne commands and we'll obey, over the hills and far away. No more from sound of drum retreat, while Marlborough and Galway beat the French and Spaniards every day, when over the hills and far away, over the hills and o'er the main, to Flanders, Portugal and Spain. Queen Anne commands and we'll obey,